Good afternoon, everyone. This is Joe Peterson. I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce my latest publication, John Dee's Mysteriorum Libri Quinque, or 5 Books of Mysteries, 3rd edition. It's been almost 40 years since the first edition and 20 years since the second, and scholarship has not been idle. I was very excited, therefore, when Red Wheel Weiser approached me about doing a new edition. It has really been a lifelong project for me, having started researching John Dee in the 70s, and my other books are in many ways offshoots of that research and circle back to Dee. John Dee, of course, is probably best known as Queen Elizabeth's scientific advisor in the 1500s. Like many others, my first introduction to Dee was from Casaubon's publication of Dr. Dee's experiments with communicating with non-physical intelligences, or if you prefer, spirits or angels. These are probably the most detailed records of the actual practice of ceremonial magic known. Casaubon's 1659 book, titled True and Faithful Relation Between Dr. John Dee and Some Spirits, started rather abruptly with records of 1583 on, and I quickly discovered that manuscripts of earlier and later records exist that had never been published. I spent some time in the 1970s studying the manuscripts and related printed records firsthand, including at the British Library, and published a first edition of these earlier records in 1985, covering the years 1581 to 1583. Weiser Books published a revised edition in 2003, with all the Latin translated, expanded introduction, and other explanatory notes. In the 20 years since then, Dee studies have advanced dramatically, and we're all excited to produce a new edition which could include many of these new findings. The 2003 edition, although it's a large book, some 510 pages, was only available in paperback, and Red Wheel Weiser wanted to do a deluxe hardbound edition. And they've really outdone themselves with premium cover, sewn binding, heavy premium paper, and more. Graphics and fonts were also greatly improved. Also since 2003, new editions of Dee's sources have been published, including Artephius, the Sworn Book of Honorius, Heptameron, the Book of Soyga or Aldaraya, as well as Summa Sacra Magica in Dr. Gare's dissertation. Incidentally, I recently published an edition and translation of the Liber Trium Animarum, or Book of Three Souls, from Gunnell's Summa, which Dee carefully numbered. It consists of magical prayers which are integral to the Summa, and especially to Gunnell's version of the Sworn Book, which is apparently older than the Northern European manuscript tradition. In addition, there's an important and illuminating new translation of John Dee's Monas Hieroglyphica by Dr. Teresa Burns and Nancy Turner, a new translation of Agrippa's Occult Philosophy by Eric Purdue, and a translation of Trithemius's Steganographia by Stephen Skinner. Also, recent studies by Glyn Perry, Carlos Gilly, Deb Harkness, Grigory Sony, Jan Veenstra, Julian Veronese, and others. I mentioned Casaubon's 1659 publication already, but wanted to note that it's full of typographical errors, sometimes dozens on a single page, and silently omits the frequent drawings found on the manuscripts. Reliance on it alone, without the manuscript sources, has sadly resulted in the perpetuation of many errors. The good news is that Stephen Skinner published a corrected and critical edition of this later material in his 2019 book, John Dee's Spiritual Diary, which includes translations of the frequent Latin passages and a lot of additional valuable information. Another advance has been the explosion of digital archives, making it possible to study many more texts without handling them. Note, however, that recent high-res photos posted by the British Library show significant damage to the manuscript since I first saw them, and my microfilms from the 70s are actually still more readable in many places. It's also possible to recover lost material from other early copies made by Dee himself, as well as those of Elias Ashmole. D's holograph in Ashmole manuscript 1790, for example, allowed me to restore material damaged in Sloane 3188 and not found elsewhere. What else is new in this edition? Expanded introduction, notes, and references, including more details on D's sources. I've also included 5 new appendices. 1, the Seal of God, Sigillum Dei Emeth, variants that D was known to have owned. 2, analysis of D's holy table and other apparatus. 3, the complete 3-angel scrying ritual, Ancor, Anacor, and Amilos, based on the Manchester manuscript. Next, an appendix covering a likely precursor to D's holy table, the Almadel, with a long excerpt of the ritual based on Latin manuscripts, translated into English, significantly more complete than the English version that was included in the Lesser Key of Solomon. Another precursor, the Semiforas table. I'll get back to each of these in a bit. Here's another gem discovered by Stephen Klukas. Part of D's practice regularly included prayers from a book of Psalms and precatory prayers by John Fisher. Fisher was a Catholic bishop who was martyred by Henry VIII in 1535. I imagine this might have been a very dangerous book to have, given the anti-Catholic sentiment at the time. Note, Fisher's Latin works, including his book of Psalms and Prayers, were translated by Henry's 6th wife, who survived him, Catherine Parr. She turned out to be a brilliant scholar. Her writings are available in print. Another D source that has come to light since the 2nd edition is the book Alderaya or Soyga, which D mentions many times. An edition with English translation was produced by Jane Coopin in 2014 and is available on esotericarchives.com. Another scrying method D was familiar with and may have tried is Artephius's Art of 3 Vases. D mentions it in his 1570 book Mathematical Preface. Some of you may have seen an account of it in Grillet de Givry's Witchcraft, Magic, and Alchemy of 1971. This method uses different light sources and vases with different liquids to divine past, present, and future events. As for likely magic texts that informed his experiments, one he may have used directly is Sloane Manuscript 3854, which has notes inserted in blank spaces between parts, which seem to be in Edward Kelly's handwriting, mentioning some of the spirits they were dealing with. This manuscript includes other magic texts from different periods, including the earliest, 14th century, and sole complete version of the Liber Loagaeth Honorii, or Sworn Book of Anurius. I was amazed at how tiny this manuscript is, very thick, shaped like a brick, with tiny writing, a little less than 14 by 20 centimeters. Sloane Manuscript 3853 contains another collection of magical texts, referencing a spirit mentioned by D. Lundrum Guffa. D. and Kelly may not have used this specific manuscript, but a closely related copy of the text. It is mid-1500s, however, and also contains large excerpts from the Sworn Book of Anurius, with yet another variant of the Seal of God. Similarly, something similar to Sloane Manuscript 3846, which is a bit later, 1598, which contains a text mentioning several D spirits, Andromelius, Maharian, and Obelison. Also, you can see another reference here to the 3 spirits, Ancor, Anacor, and Amilos. As mentioned earlier, in Appendix 1 I compare the 2 main variants of the Seal of God, or Sigillum Dei Emeth, that D had before him when he asked the spirits which was more correct, along with their new version. D's actual wax seals can still be seen in the British Museum, along with some of his other magical artifacts. Incidentally, I'm not sure if anyone has pointed this out before, but D's actual sigil shows differences from that found in the Sloane Manuscript 3188. In particular, the actual wax seal has more crosses. Replicas can be purchased from many sources, but I can't vouch for the accuracy of any of them. In New Appendix 2, I delve into D's holy table, on which he conducted his later scrying sessions. The version shown on the left was that published by Casaubon and described by Elias Ashmole as accurate. He had seen the actual table in Joseph Cotton's library and taken detailed measurements and notes. The version on the right shows what it would look like if the proportions were adjusted to match the instructions given by the spirits. The dashed circle in the middle represents the wax seal of God, which is placed on top of the table. I think it's significant that the square in the center extends exactly to the circumference of the wax seal. Some debate has risen recently about whether the letters are transposed correctly in the Casaubon engraving. This has led some practitioners to reverse the letters in the border. It seems to me, however, that Ashmole's testimony and meticulous measurements shown here, down to 1/10 of an inch, should put to rest any doubts that Casaubon's engraving is correct. A careful reading of Dee's records also seems to support this conclusion. Also of note, it seems Dee felt it was too dangerous to haul his table around Europe and had new ones built as needed. In Appendix 3 and 4, I present details of 2 other magic altars or tables that Dee was familiar with and he may have used in early experiments. The first is the Almadel or Almandal, which is one of the oldest Solomonic magic texts and may go back ultimately to Sanskrit or Persian origins. I translate a large part of the Latin text, which, as I said earlier, is much more complete than that found in the Lesser Key of Solomon. I think people will find it very interesting. The second is the Semiforas table with 4 alphabets written around the border and sacred names from 4 different traditions, along with the names of angels. Unfortunately, the Almadel text has been removed from the Castle manuscript since Dee had it, but the versions found in Halle manuscript and a German translation of the Summa probably reflect the text now missing from the Castle manuscript. In this version, designated HA1 by Dr. Gare, the Almandel should be made of brass or red copper eris rubrum, 12 digits or 3 palms square. In the Liber Intelligentiarum version, it's made of wax. In Appendix 5, I present one of the most complete versions of the 3 angels scrying ritual that I found. This Manchester manuscript is enormously valuable, but unfortunately it's very difficult to read in places, and I had to use various photo-enhancing techniques to read all of it, along with comparing with other exemplars. Another complete version can be found in the Book of Oberon, or Folger Library Book of Magic manuscript. Before I close, I wanted to make 2 more observations. First, I'd like to point out Dee's heavy involvement with alchemical and metallurgical research during the same period as part of a sponsored network of experts. This sponsorship was critical to him since it enabled him to secure high-quality glass vessels to observe the changes. This program required him to, quote, record successes as well as failures, an important step toward the scientific method, as Glenn Perry noted. Dee applied the same diligence to his metaphysical investigations. Besides the detailed chronological records of the proceedings, he produced a series of books that organize and summarize the results systematically. Unfortunately, only one of his alchemical notebooks seems to have survived. I believe Edward Kelly's reason for approaching Dee in the first place was probably to tap into this alchemical work, which would explain a lot of the conflict between them. The other observation regards Liber Loagaeth, the mysterious book that the spirits delivered, which is so central to much of Dee's work. I'd like to point out that Sloane manuscript 3189 is not the complete Liber Loagaeth, as sometimes assumed, but only the latter part written out by Kelly. The earlier parts are in Sloane 3188. To further confuse things, Sloane 3188 gives a phonetic rendering as read by the spirit designated M.E. It is not the same as the correct spelling in the angelic language. I've assembled both parts together on the Esoteric Archives website. I don't believe anyone else has done this yet. Thanks for watching and for your support. I especially want to thank Red Wheel Weiser team for their amazing editorial work and for making this such a beautiful book. Also, Adam McLean for publishing the first edition. I also appreciate the editorial reviewers for their positive feedback, including Jason Miller, Jason Louv, and Mark Stavish. According to Red Wheel Weiser's website, this new edition should be available on July 31st, but Amazon has it listed as August 19th for some reason, so we'll see. I encourage everyone to support your local bookstores, but it can also be ordered directly from Red Wheel Weiser, Amazon, Watkin Books, and other places. Both Amazon and Watkins are offering nice discounts. Finally, there's a lot of free content on esotericarchives.com website, which you may want to check out, including Liber Loagaeth, the Book of Soyga, and the Book of Three Souls. And as always, please leave comments below, and thanks again.